Hello, everyone. It is Professor Hamamoto at your service. It is July 7th, year 2024. The time is 4 o'clock p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. Welcome, one and all. Now, you might notice that the setting is a little bit different now. I've just moved into a new studio area. The lighting's not quite right, but considering the constraints I have, it's one that I was able to get online. But you're my number one priority. I want to be with you here every Sunday with regularity, especially today, because I've been reading diligently, and it was no effort at all because it's a really exciting book. It's titled Notes to a Scandal, a real page turner, as they say. And today's talk is titled Bewitchery of Cate Blanchett and a Dame Judi Dench. Most of you know who Cate Blanchett is. Perhaps fewer of you know of Judi Dench, although she's been, I guess, on the scene, both in theater and in cinema, for about 5 decades. And, Cate Blanchett has been around now for, I don't know, about 20 years or so. And I'm going to do something novel today. At least it's novel to me, no pun intended. And that is that I'm going to be doing sort of a dual critique, a twin critique that involves the novel, first of all, the piece of fiction, Notes on a Scandal, and then its literary or its cinema adaptation, which was released in 2006, I believe. I'm seeing that there's tons of reverb here. Let me see if I can correct that. It might be because of the air conditioner that I have on here. And it might be because of how's it going now? All right. Another one person comments that there's no reverb here. Maybe it's on the receiving end. Anyway, I try to check it out as best as I can, but Vin Martinelli, welcome. Sounds okay to me. Thank you very much. Sorry for the delay, but I'd rather take some precautions before I launch into something here. So I think Judi Dench has won a number of Golden Globes and BAFTA awards, British Film Institute. She's a British actress, and Cate Blanchett is Australian. All right, but they're within the Five Eyes world, right? The English-speaking Anglo-American world. And I'm mentioning this because that's central to this critique of the novel, is that there's some propaganda, very subtle, and this is what I excel in, I'd like to think, subtle propaganda that's putting forth an agenda. It's not hitting us over the head like these real strident DFI people or DEI people or the GLBTQ people, the ones that are just really street level, in your face type of they're not propagandists, they're agitation propaganda. This is the more subtle literary propaganda that I think justifies the salaries of literary critics, both in academia and outside academia, or straddling journalism, as well as the academic world, because I believe that Zoe Heller is being positioned for some major literary prizes. In fact, she was for Notes on a Scandal was nominated for the Booker Prize, Booker, which is roughly equivalent to the American Pulitzer Prize. Right, it's a literary prize, and the best piece of literature published that year gets the top honors, and she was nominated for that, which is kind of surprising to me, but maybe it shouldn't be. Right, because the book is an easy read. It's a quick read. There's some subtleties in there that you can pick out, I believe, but it's not a difficult novel to read. You don't have to take a course in literary criticism in order to. It's not one of those postmodern, post-structuralist novels. It's not even like Virginia Woolf, right? Who we'll talk about briefly in this talk here, because I think it owes this fiction, and Noe Heller herself as an artist owes a lot to the late great Virginia Woolf, who's not my cup of tea, but she's definitely something, a force that needs to be reckoned with so far as the history of ideas, modern feminism, modern socialism. Many of you know, oh yeah, I remember Virginia Woolf, Leonard Woolf. Yeah, wasn't she a Fabian socialist? And then now you're going to start putting oh yeah, the Tavistock Institute. Don't bother. We already know this stuff here, right? But yeah, that's what she's associated with. And this novel here is much a more subtle gloss on what Virginia Woolf was laying down decades ago. I think she died in 1941. World War II was just getting underway. Britain had already been at war for almost a couple of years. I think she committed suicide. She had a history of mental illness. I won't go into her biography. But, and I'm getting ahead of myself here. So we'll, first of all, talk about why this is relevant to us in 2024 and why it's relevant to Americans, why it's relevant to people in the English-speaking world or advanced capitalist societies, right? When I say advanced capitalists, I mean advanced industrial, post-industrial societies like Germany, France, right? Japan, for example. I think it has relevance because there's a similar process that's taking place worldwide, and that is the dissolution of the middle-class family, the bourgeois family, the petty bourgeois family, the nuclear family, if you want to call it that, the family. And I don't have to give you the data on it. It relates very much to the drop in fertility, which is also part of the larger plan, germinated, if I could use the pun, by the same rough circle of scientists and intellectuals and humanists, literary artists who are around the Bloomsbury people, right? And their American counterparts and their Canadian counterparts. Canada looms large in this too, because they're very much part of this subtle propaganda effort to the extent that they're all over in our literature. They're all over in our, specifically our magazine publishing. And they're all over in even our political life. But remember, Canada is a foreign country. Just because they are of Anglo-Saxon origins or otherwise known as white, that doesn't make them Americans and vice versa. Right? Try to go to Canada without a passport, you're not going to be let in unless you're an illegal alien and know how to do it. But you get my point. It's the same with Australians or New Zealanders, and these are individuals who take delight in telling America, and this is part of the demoralization process that's coming from Britain, City of London, and directed to America through their agents. And they're in publishing, not just in magazines, which I'll get to in a moment, but literary as well as mass media and more new media. I've talked about this over and over again. So we're going to touch upon that because we're going to see these connecting threads, these patterns, if you will, that recur. So I'm saying that, I'm arguing that Notes on a Scandal, here's my copy right here. Excuse me for turning my back on you. I'm still getting my setup together. Here's a novel version, Zoe Heller. Oh, I didn't really study the cover art closely. I'm going to have to look at it closely. But it's an apple with a cherry on top. I wonder what the symbolism is there. All right. So thank you very much, patrons, for allowing me to buy that. And also, I saw the film version. Remember, we're going to go on 2 tracks here today, the film and the novel, starring Cate Blanchett and Judi Dench. Notes on a Scandal. Only $8, $7.99. DVDs are going way down in price because streaming is kind of, well, not kind of, has taken over. So I view these as a really good investment to have a physical copy. So that's one, we're in an inflationary spiral. This is one bargain here and I don't have any stock in that retail company, They Ate the World, that's convenient. And look at it's silver, or this one has cover art on it, but it even looks like currency. Unlike Bitcoin, you can hold it. And $7.99, that's almost nothing these days. Cost you to buy a cup of coffee for that much these days. So here's the chief texts here. If I have some time, maybe I'll read some of the interesting parts of the novel. It's got some clever asides. And part of the challenge that I have undertaken today is connect the Zoe Heller novel, Notes on a Scandal, with the larger literary currents that go back historically, right? I'd say it goes back at least to Nathaniel Hawthorne, right? Before you tune out, I know you were made to read this in high school and you hated it because it's an old-fashioned language and there's words in there that don't exist anymore. They exist, they're just not in use. So what I do, and I have the same difficulty as you. I mean, I'm a post-war person, so I only know post-war English and slang, but I get the Oxford annotated versions. It's Oxford World Classics. This is Nathaniel Hawthorne, the Blithedale Romance. The reason I bring in Hawthorne, and I'll get back to Cate Blanchett, because I know you want to see her. You want to see a clip on her, so do I. And you want to hear the more salacious aspects of the novel and the film. But we have to go through old Nat first. Nathaniel, you might have read him in high school. These days, they might not let you read it because we're operating under a censorship plague. I think we're kind of getting out of it now, by the way. But you might have read The Scarlet Letter in high school. I think I didn't read it in high school, but I read Hawthorne and didn't like it because it's old-fashioned. It was really a difficult read. I didn't like Moby Dick either, and I couldn't get into Moby Dick until I got into grad school and had learned some history, American history, Anglo-American history, world history, because these books may seem to be written for children or young adults or as entertainments. They are. And the people back then were highly literate, but we have high literate people here in the 21st century. It's just that they didn't have the internet. They didn't have NetStream or Netflix. Yeah, let's call it NetStream. Just make it simple. They didn't have all this endless stream of information and entertainment to deal with, so they could really dwell on this. So anyway, the reason I brought up Nathaniel Hawthorne is because this book is about the Brook Farm. You probably heard about it when you were in high school, in your early American history or pre-modern history. And that was a commune. It was, I guess you would call it a utopian socialist intentional communities. Sociologists call them intentional communities. That is, these are groups of like-minded people who get together to form a political, economic, cultural, social, religious way of living, intentional. And that seems like kind of a redundancy, but most of us are born into communities and we don't really make a conscious decision to move away and start a new one. Most of us, maybe some of us do today. Some of us are thinking about it, not me. It's too much work. And so far as I'm concerned, all these utopian experiments, they sound good on paper, and it sounds good when you're reading about it. I have people on my Patreon who are trying to promote it on my site, right? But I see the same patterns from year to year that doesn't change. It's utopianism, and they always end in failure. And I think that's part of the psyops. They want failure. They want to persuade you that any type of effort that you can exert personally is an exercise in futility. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that these intentional, and nowadays, a lot of these so-called intentional communities, as we found out through the book Chaos, they're fake. They're synthetic. They're astroturf. They are results of intelligence agencies like Jonestown, which I've talked about numerous times here on the Professor Hamamoto channel. We remember Jim Jones? He made the people drink. It's entered the language. Yeah, they drink the Kool-Aid. Well, it's actually Flavor Aid for the nitpickers in the comment section, I know. But that's an example of an intentional community. Another example, you can have virtual intentional communities. And that's what we see on Butt Facebook, which is kind of going out for the young people. But you got TikTok, the ticking time bomb. And some of these sites, what is it called, fans only, something like that. There's all these new platforms, and they come and go. But anyway, it's very much within the American grain, if I could use a familiar phrase. The Blithedale Romance, utopian socialism. And Nathaniel Hawthorne was one of the founding members of Brook Farm. He bought shares into it. He took it out pretty quickly after that. I think he got an idea that, hey, I'm not going to get any writing done if I live with these people here. It's probably like living amongst a community of Karens, nitpicking you to scolding you, right? I just like to be left the hell alone. That's my voluntary community, my intentional community. Anyway, that's another topic itself. So anyway, you get the point. This is what we're being subtly propagandized into through the book and the film, Notes on a Scandal. It's a form of utopian socialism. And by that, it's mostly non-Marxian, right? However, there's a not heavy, I'd say it was a subtle element of Marxist socialism or democratic socialism or communalism, Marxist communalism. There's different types of communism. It's not all Marx. There's the utopian, which are non-Marxist, like the Bloomsbury people. They're non-Marxist socialists. They want to keep the class system intact because they're at or near the top of the class system. They're not going to destroy it. But they do want to provide certain amenities and opportunities for the lower classes, the working classes in Britain, in the US, but particularly in Britain, we're talking about here, because they can make revolution. They could be a destabilizing force in society in large and be a disturbing element within the larger society. So why not control it? Why not create the Tavistock Society to control their minds and have these educational programs, working man colleges, working man schools? And I mention that because that's part of the plot line of the novel and the film, Notes on a Scandal, and that it takes place in a school, not a comprehensive school, not one of the elite schools, but a school that's self-consciously directed for the working class, right? In fact, Judi Dench, her name's Barbara Covett, Covett, like covet, right? It's biblical. Thou shalt not covet another man's wife, but she is coveting another man's wife. It happens to be Cate Blanchett, whose name is Sheba, short for Bathsheba. Oh, all you people start perking up, huh? There's got some biblical connotations going on here. And you think that's an accident? No, not at all. We'll get into that, hopefully, if I don't forget. There's so many trails you can follow in the film and fiction. That's what I enjoy about it. And I like to explore those trails and share with you all the squirrels that I observe. I'm not talking about the furry animal. I'm talking about the people who are the squirrely ones. Some of them are perverted. Right? They're beyond it. I mean, it's an insult in the animal kingdom. Because, man, Judi Dench is a piece of work. Barbara Covett, she's, to call her manipulative is putting it lightly. She's Machiavellian. She's very much like people that you have known or do know currently. I certainly have known many Barbara Covetts in my life, and I was in education. And they try to target me for friendship and camaraderie and confessionals. They wanted to have me confide and spill my guts in these types of situations, these difficult situations where students are out of control, right? They talk back at you, they smart off. They're sitting in the back insolently spitting sunflower seeds on the classroom floor. George Bush Jr. used to do that when he was at business school at Harvard. I remember, I could just picture that. You know the types. So these people, these vampire, and the term is used in the book and in the film, I believe. I might be a little bit hazy. I might get the two mixed up. So the nitpickers out there, you keep nitpicking away. I'm not going to let it stop me. I'm just going to blurt it out. I think it's in the film where they're Barbara Covett. She's the senior teacher in the picture that we saw here. That's Dame Judi Dench. She's a vampire. She's an energy vampire. She's a soul vampire. And that's an archetype in itself, right? The vampire. Bram Stoker, the Irish writer, you know enough about that to get the idea. So this is a story, and I think this is one of the reasons why it became a bestseller. This is a story that you and me, if we live in the world, we're very familiar with these types of people, but they're not caricatures. It's just Zoe Heller is much more subtle than that. She started as a journalist. She's adept at the art of observation, just as an exercise for yourself to try to develop your own novelistic eye or your cinema eye, your artist's eye, and it's never too late. And some of you are probably already doing this. Just go to TJ Maxx and go shopping and pretend to be looking through the racks, but you're actually looking at the people and observing their behavior, looking at their physical types, their movements. When you're interacting with them, maybe you can go home and jot it down in a journal obsessively. That was Barbara's. I'm just going to call her Barbara Covett, the senior teacher, Judi Dench. That was her MO, modus operandus. She obsessively recorded her everyday life because she had nothing else going for herself. She was an isolated, lonely, they used to call them spinsters back in the old days. So I'm going to use the term, even though I'll be slapped down by the nitpickers. But I'll use that term. And she's very bitter, right? No one wants to wind up like that, but many of us do, right? So go to TJ Maxx, go to Costco, go to Walmart, and just go there as if you are not a, what's the camera that you attach to your body? You are the camera. You're not just mechanically recording something. You are observing something and working. Your imagination is working on it. And you can come up with all kinds of interesting inferences on people that probably will not be far off the track if you live long enough and have some sort of frame of reference. That's what journalists do. That's what, especially her type of journalism, which is called confessional journalism. It's quite subjective. There's a type of journalism that pretends to be objective. Say, oh yeah, so-and-so did this, so-and-so did that. And they try to remain true to the facts. But there's something called more confessional or subjective journalism that was experimented with heavily in the 60s. It was called the new journalism. Thomas Wolfe, Hunter Thompson, maybe people like Gay Talese to a certain extent, but definitely people like Tom Wolfe is probably the best example of that. And now there's something called creative nonfiction. Seems like a contradiction, but that's being offered as an emphasis, if not a degree program. And I mentioned the degree programs because Zoe Heller is a graduate of, I think she has an MFA, Master of Fine Arts. And I am philosophically and practically opposed to MFA programs in literature, especially after I found, I already was, but especially when I found out that most MFA programs are compromised by intelligence agencies, especially one up at the University of Iowa, the vaunted Iowa Writers Workshop, where Kurt Vonnegut used to teach fairly regularly. But they produced a whole generation of literature authors, right? Not the pop writers, not the Stephen King, but the people who wrote literary fiction. That's the Iowa Writers Workshop. But there's at least a couple books on it, full-length studies that talked about it was a front for the Central Intelligence Agency. And we already know about Mockingbird Media, the people here in the chat room. And so I don't have to talk, we know about journalism. And that's where, returning to my point about Zoe Heller, is that she got her master's degree, graduate degree, and she's British at Columbia University. Columbia University, because, I come out from the academic world, and whenever I get a chance to tie in the academic world to the problems that we're experiencing today, politically, and in areas of the culture and the economy, I like to look at the elite schools like Columbia. Right. There's a reason why they did the recent psyops on the occupation and said, oh, yeah, we're going to have a fake battle between the Palestinian students and the Jewish students and all the useful idiots in between. Remember that? That was only a couple months ago. And that's all you could hear the retooled comedians talk about on controlled independent media. All the retooled comedians who are now trying to pass themselves off as political pundits couldn't stop talking about it. So I'm not going to go into it. So that's Zoe. I'm kind of presenting to you her curriculum vitae, her bona fides, to talk to you about how these books are created, not by the imagination of some inspired author, but by the political, economic, cultural agenda of social cultural engineers, such as, now I'm not saying she's associated with it, but as an example that you would know, such as Tavistock. And by now there's scores of, if not hundreds of them. And they all come out of the university. The Columbia School of Journalism is one of the main motors of disinformation and propaganda and conditioning the ideological milieu. And they have a prestigious set of awards and they have a journalism, but journalism of that nature has never been worse in American history, even in the days of so-called yellow journalism. Because it's corporatized, it's Pentagon run, it's military, it's bankrupt. That's why they have to keep setting these fires periodically. And they might be doing that again very soon during the run up to the election, right? Zoe Heller writes fiction, but make no mistake about it, she is politically involved. She's politically savvy. She's politically connected. So let me turn our attention to that, the political connection. It so happens, and I have to do the research in preparing for you. I'm not some pop-up pundit, some retooled comedian whose only expertise lies in not leaving any dead air and always going for the punchline, right? And I don't think he started out as a comedian, but he might as well be. Cenk Uygur figures into this, right? Where did that ass clown come from? By the way, he ran for president of the United States. He's so stupid. He was not eligible to run for president. He was not born in the United States. Cenk Uygur, who stupidly calls his channel the Young Turks. Why don't you call yourself the young Nazis? I mean, that wouldn't go over very well to Armenians, would it? But of course, they put an Armenian American woman as his co-host, right? Purposely so. That's part of the psyop, by the way. Just that pairing. Do you think putting Mika Brzezinski next to Killer Joe Scarborough is some accident, some cute pairing out of a romantic comedy? No, not at all. It's calculated, just like the literary figure we know as Zoe Heller is a calculation. She's a construct, right? And this goes beyond, we always hear nowadays, everybody's so clever saying, oh, yeah, that person's compromised, or that person's a limited hangout. That person's those are our people who are using these terms, throwing them around. David Icke, if you will allow me, because I know people are going to hate me if I mention people that they don't like, and if I don't mention people they do like, because they're fanboy, psychology driven. He had coined a term. I think he called them independent controlled media, or because the mainstream media took care of itself. It destroyed itself. It just cannibalized itself. But to replace it is now the ISM, I guess, independent social, but they're not really indie. And we're seeing more and more of it, and I'm seeing more and more of you fall prey to these people's born again conservatism, liberalism, or libertarianism, right? People like Russell Brand, who, by the way, is not an American. Again, this is a Five Eyes operation we're facing, coordinated out of the city of London, translated over into their Canadian holdings in Australian. Cate Blanchett is Australian. And they have their little prize system for the people who write the type of books that they want to see. So what do they want to see? The handlers, the engineers, whoever they are. And we won't even get into that at this point. But there is a group of gatekeepers, opinion leaders, who are connected to the hereditary bloodlines, the bankers, who get paid good money, and they get to enjoy a certain degree of celebrity. We'll see one in a moment. His name's Graydon Carter. He retired not that long ago from Vanity Fair as the editor-in-chief, but he is a Canadian subject. Now, I didn't realize that because his accent's very American. He didn't say a boot, or he didn't say car. You didn't have the linguistic giveaways that you can usually suss them out, right? Most of Saturday Night Live is Canadian humor. That's why it's so leftist, anti-American. It's run by Lorne Michaels, who is Canadian. And a lot of the actors that came out of it, including Dan Aykroyd, are Canadians. This is nothing against Canadians. I'm just saying it's part of a larger British neo-imperial psychological operations that we like to talk about incessantly. Oh, yeah, MK Ultra, blah, 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 sexy Nazis, jolly on. I mean, you have the whole litany that shows up in the comment section by newbies who are lecturing me, but you can't see what's going on in front of you right now, 2024. Sorry, I don't mean to sound scolding, but I moved into a new place now, and I don't have neighbors like sharing a wall, so I can speak loudly now. I can project more. I can go on rants because I'm not afraid that someone's going to call out and say, hey, there's a disturbance, a domestic disturbance going on, and they'll call the fuzz on me. Plus, I have the air conditioner going on, so I have to kind of talk over it. Maybe that's the reverb that's being triggered. Okay. Now, this is a very timely book because there's many, many levels, but it's very timely because it so happens that in the last few decades, maybe 2 decades at minimum, we've seen I don't know, I can't quantify it, but at least from what I've been seeing, there's been a huge uptick in illicit sexual relationships between female teachers and male students, underage male students. We're talking about K through 12, kindergarten through high school in America is called K through 12. K kindergarten, 12 is senior in high school. They're roughly 17 years old, 18. And in most states in America, you are an adult at 18, or some states you're adult at 16. So anyway, this book is about, premise here is about the affair between a woman who's 41, something like that, having an affair with a 16-year-old, Stephen Conley. He's a working class lad. You can tell by his sociolect. He lives in council housing, or as we call it, the projects. And she has, without getting, too deeply into it, she has a torrid affair with him. And this whole book is about not even trying to rationalize what went on, to glamorize it, or even if this was a trashy novel like Flowers in the Attic, V.C. Andrews. Remember I gave a talk on V.C. Andrews? Thank you, Lena Pooh, for turning me on to V.C. Andrews. She's hearing me talk about all these books and she says, have you ever heard of V.C. Andrews? I said, no. She says, you got to check her out. And I did do a talk on it. Turns out all my listeners, all my audience, they knew who V.C. Andrews was, and they read her, especially the females. All right, this is kind of like a V.C. Andrews book for young adults to older adults to serious readers. I use that with the air quotes serious, because if you're reading anything, you're a serious reader as far as I'm concerned. But people who have literary pretensions, because you read the New Yorker, or you have a subscription to Vanity Fair, or you read the New York Times, right? Or the Wall Street. You don't read the National Enquirer or the New York Post. I do. I love it. I like to also read the trashy tabloids of Britain, because that's where you find the real information and all the interesting side stories. Yeah, I read the mainstream, the ones that they're stuffy and they want to be the newspaper of record that all the important, serious people read, right? Balderdash. I never respected that distinction, right? I mean, after all, I went after a master's degree in popular culture because I wanted to say, hey, it's all the same. And Zoe Heller, to her credit, has managed to bridge that gap between elite middle-class bourgeois, upper middle-class sexuality and that of the hoi polloi, the wannabes, the aspirationals, the ones who are first-generational women who are getting their first professional track job out of university, or the ones with a master's degree from Columbia, or perhaps they got a law degree from Yale. That's their audience. They're called, in the marketing world, they're called aspirationals. But me, I am a perennial aspirational. I'm a perennial wannabe, and I'm a perennial yellow man, which makes me an outsider. And according to Graydon Carter, that's what makes him such a great editor, that he's Canadian. So he's looking at America from a fresh perspective. Let's take a look at that. Well, we will in a minute. I can't take this out of order. First of all, let me go back to my original point about sex scandals. So there's been an uptick in sex scandals. We're seeing more of it all the time in the daily news. There's tons of these themes grouped in YouTube, if you're inclined to check it out. Let's just take a look at a couple of them right now. These are fairly recent.
This afternoon about two teachers accused of having inappropriate relationships with students at Slidell High School. Police say an investigation into one of the teachers led to additional charges against her and the arrest of another teacher. WDSU reporter Shay O'Connor is getting inside information from another teacher at that school. Shay, what have you learned?
Travis, I actually spoke with a teacher who did not want to be identified out of fear of retaliation, but that teacher tells me that the two teachers, or the two former teachers, were actually really good friends here at the high school. Now, on your screen right now, that's the mugshots of both women. That's 35-year-old Alexa Wingirter and 31-year-old Shelby Kavanagh. Now, this teacher tells me not only were the two women well connected within the St. Tammany school system, but several teachers and students within the school have been complaining to administrators at the school about claims of sexual misconduct with Wingirter in particular for years. Now,
okay, these are women who are long past college, and they're not even within the same generation, who are having sex, presumably, with high school students, males. I read the print article, and it's men, but it could be women or girls, whatever. There you have adults having illicit sex. That's one story. Here's another one. I'm not going to go too far into it. I just really require much energy to find these stories. They're all over the place. That's the point I'm trying to make. And we're going to conclude, gosh, time's running away so quickly from me, with the famous case of Mary Kay Letourneau. That was the first major case in America that I know of where this type of liaison came to light. But here's a more recent one before we get to Mary Kay Letourneau.
Face serious charges involving students. A Gordon County grand jury has indicted Rayleigh Greason and Brooklyn Schuler on charges related to having sex with students. The two were reportedly employed by the City of Calhoun School District at the time. The indictment states between October 2021 and January 22, Greason had sex with two male students.
Okay, you can fill in the details for yourself. It's pretty predictable, unfortunately. Something just occurred to me. They seem the women sexual predators seem to work as teams. They like to work together too. The male predators typically work by themselves. So I don't know what to make of that. That's just a casual observation. You can disconfirm it empirically if you want, or if you even want to bother with that. So Zoe Heller is writing when all this is coming about. And it's the topic itself is salacious. You're going to get some reads out of it by people who don't care a bit about literature, who don't read the New Yorker or Vanity Fair, who don't know what the Booker Prize is. They want to read about the juicy bits right here. Right? And I don't know. I think this came out about, there was a whole slew of books similar to this with women behaving in certain ways that were once upon a time frowned upon, to put it lightly. I mean, that you would have been, marked with a scarlet letter, a la Nathaniel Hawthorne. But remember 50 Shades of Grey? This is far, but there's no comparison. I couldn't get through 50 Shades of Grey, and I couldn't watch the movie either. I wanted to because I want to understand what people are interested in, but I couldn't do it. It was just so awful. So anyway, let's continue. I'm already running out of time. Okay, now for the moment you've been waiting for. We get to see Cate Blanchett. Super brilliant, intelligent. I don't have any smut on her. Do you? I don't know if she's involved in witchery per se. We'll find out. She's getting all kinds of incredible parts. And what we've learned over the past few years is that those parts don't come free. There's always strings attached. Right? You know what I'm saying? But I'm not impugning her integrity. I'm just saying let's be on the lookout. And let's get ahead of problems instead of always approaching them on the back foot. So here she is, the one and only Cate Blanchett, one of the top actresses of the English-speaking world today.
Award winner Cate Blanchett is one of Hollywood's busiest and most talented actresses. Right now, she is starring in 3 of the most acclaimed movies of the year, including her Golden Globe-nominated performance in a new film called Notes on a Scandal. And Cate is with us. Good morning, good morning, good morning.
How are you?
I watched this movie over the weekend, and I thought to myself, it's too bad the poor girl just can't act. You can't.
It's been a tough year.
You are so good in all of these movies.
Oh, thanks. Well, they're good. They're good roles.
They're really good.
And people talk. I sort of can't join in the conversation when people start saying there's no good roles for women. Playing Sheba opposite Judi Dench, and then in Alejandro's film Babel, and with Steven Soderbergh and George Clooney. Good German.
Phenomenal, phenomenal. Well, let's start with the one with Judi Dench, because this is an amazing story of a school teacher, a scandal very familiar in America, where the school teacher goes off with a 15-year-old boy, but it's really not about that.
No, I think that was what was great about what Patrick Marber's done with the screenplay, is he's really made, as much as you can, the scandal be incidental. It's really about this terrible well of loneliness that draws these 2 women together.
It is a thriller. You are on the edge of your seat every single second, because you don't know what's going to happen next. And you said it was the toughest role you've ever had to play. I read that someplace.
Yeah, I think probably morally. I mean, I sort of pride myself on not judging a character and not patronising an audience and leaving the judgment open to them.
Okay, if I play it any longer, I'll probably get a copyright strike. I might get a copyright strike anyway from CBS. But you can see the native intelligence of a Cate Blanchett. I saw when I was showing this that we have a special viewer right here. She doesn't normally chime in. It's Kirby Summers, the great author and researcher and investigative journalist and author. You should read the billionaire's girlfriend or mistress. I'm not getting the title wrong. That's where you should start. But she has a really good series going on right now. I'm in a really good one on her Substack. So you want to check. I know a lot of you who watch my channel are also reading along with her. And she said there's some tea to be spilled on Cate Blanchett. Maybe hopefully she'll fill us in. But we're now much more attuned to what's really going on, even behind these journalists, so-called, right? The ones that are getting all the accolades that come out of the Columbia School of Journalism. Thanks to Kirby Summers. Thank you, Kirby, for watching today. Let's move on, because I'm almost out of time already, and continue with some of these insights that I think are important to understand. What is the objective here? Just in case I run out of time or you have to go, or the show runs too long. What is the objective of Zoe Heller and her handlers, right? Because without your Graydon Carson, you're not gonna be a novelist. You're not gonna be a columnist, right? She wrote for Vanity Fair, which was until he retired, was under the stewardship of Graydon Carter. He was the editor-in-chief from 1992 and 2017. Can you believe it? Once upon a time, I was naive, because I was an aspiring writer. I was naive to have that as one of my ambitions. Oh, one day I'm going to be published in Vanity Fair. Unfortunately, my father was not a globalist. My grandfather was not a democratic socialist, German emigre socialist by the name of Hermann Helle. Right? People think of British people as being Anglo-Saxon, but there are a lot of them of Polish origins, Jewish Polish origins, right? Or German Jewish or German Austrian, Sigmund Freud, for example, or even Karl Mordecai Marx. He lived most of his the latter part of his life in London, right? So the literary, philosophical, and social and political milieu of Britain that's filtered in through Tavistock and all the other social, cultural engineering agencies and all the political structures and the banking is very much dominated by this larger pan-European globalist, under the banner of communism or socialism, ideological framework. And it's no more than a framework. That's a working framework, but it's a reality. It's a political reality. That's how they operate. And that's what has taken Britain to the brink of ruin. And the same process is taking place in the United States of America, taking us to the brink of ruin. Why would they want to ruin the society? So they can have their one world utopian government, communism. So it's a fail forward. And what do you have to do in order to achieve that utopian situation? And this is true that Nathaniel Hawthorne was writing about with his Brook Farm or the Oneida. By the way, there's been hundreds going back to the 19th century and earlier, mid-19th century particularly, of these utopian socialist intentional communities in America. That's part of our tradition too. We don't realize that because we don't study it very much. Or if we do, but we're studying in a really sort of trivialized form. What do you have to do in order to achieve that utopia, which I don't believe in? You have to destroy the nuclear family. You have to destroy the middle class family, the family that was intentionally built up after the Great Depression in America and in Britain in order to rebuild the infrastructure after these wars, these banker wars that were fought, not just World War II, but World War I. But you needed that middle class to be educated, to have solid grounded in families, to build the economy. Once they build the economy to the point where they can move it into this guaranteed social income type economy, socialist, communist, democratic socialist economy, which Zoe Heller's grandfather was. He was a prominent theorist of social democracy in Germany, Hermann Heller. And you're not going to read that kind of critique in these book reviews about Notes on a Scandal. You have to have a broader reading or understanding of cultural forensics, as I do. But wait, there's more. Her father was a prominent screenwriter, as it turns out, by the name of Heller. I forgot his given name. But I was interested because I'm a student of film. And I was interested in seeing that one of his screenplays was The Killing of Sister George. I can't remember who starred in it, but they were, again, two top British actresses. And it was lesbianic. Not explicitly, because we're talking about the early 60s now, but there was a lesbianic subtext. Just like there's a lesbianic subtext here in Notes on a Scandal, which is not being advertised by Cate Blanchett or the literary critics. You're absorbing it whole hog without even realizing it, ladies and gentlemen, because by the end of the novel, they wind up living together as a companionate same-sex couple. After all that Barbara covets, because she covets the home life and the normalcy of Bathsheba, who comes right out of the Hebrew Bible, by the way. Bathsheba and David, you know the story. In preparing for this talk, I'm wondering if Bathsheba didn't have some sort of witch powers, because she did seduce King David. He became, the David of the Bible. That's Bathsheba. But she couldn't make it, the author, Heller, couldn't make it too obvious. She called her Sheba, short for Bathsheba. It's in the novel. This is what forensically you have to pick out and understand the implications there. And there was killing and wife swapping and murder in the case of David and Bathsheba, right? Go back to the Bible and read it, or look on YouTube for an overview. But you can be assured that Zoe Heller is quite familiar with that story from the Hebrew Bible, and you can be well assured that she's very well steeped into the literature of utopian socialist feminism and the agenda item, which is the abolition of the nuclear family. Hell, she even resembles facially, I'm talking about Zoe Heller, she even resembles facially Virginia Woolf, who wrote the long essay based on a couple of lectures she gave up at the Women's College in Oxford when higher education was segregated, right, back then. She did a famous essay called A Room of One's Own. A Room of One's Own. And that was required reading back in the 60s and 70s during first wave feminism. We had to read our Virginia Woolf, and we had to read that essay in specific. And what is the room of one's own? It's a room that your husband, who inherited wealth, will provide you to do all your writing or your sculpture, which Bathsheba or Sheba has a studio that her husband, who's a barrister, set up for her, and she has a career as a teacher. She's kind of starting out. She's still kind of new. The room, and the other one's a guaranteed income. That's where the socialism comes in. That's a room of one's own. And that's what we were ingesting back in the days of first wave feminism, which I'm sure Zoe Heller was influenced by. She comes from a family of artists and intellectuals. Do you understand? But she also seems to have her hand on the pulse of the pop literature, what used to be called the pulps. The real nasty mass market material like V.C. Andrews. I keep hearkening back to her because she's the most prominent practitioner of that. There's more, I'm sure. So she wrote for the New Yorker. She even wrote, when I was researching this, I found this book review by Heller. It's titled The Haunted Mind of Shirley Jackson. And I was on a big Shirley Jackson kick starting a few years ago. I got the whole edition, the Library of America's hardback copy, the novels of Shirley Jackson and short stories and maybe some correspondence thrown in there. And I read, most of her work's still in print. I was fascinated by it because it was one of those deals we read in high school, The Lottery. Remember that? And then some of these were turned into movies. The Haunting of Hill House, which I read for the first time in novel form. That's a really good novel. And she's directly connected to Hawthorne. She's directly connected to Poe. She's directly connected to what I call the American Gothic tradition. So she's very well aware of Shirley Jackson. And I haven't had I just got this yesterday, thanks to my Patreons who allow me to buy these books. I just got this new biography. It's called A Rather Haunted Life. And I've been kind of thumbing through it. And it looks good. Now, Heller herself, that's why I put witchery in the title there. She might be a witch herself. And I don't mean it with there is some witch imagery, by the way, in the film. Sheba's Down syndrome 12-year-old son gets to play a wizard in the school play, and she makes him a paper wizard hat like Harry Potter's. And there's little indications of visual cues that are cleverly inserted there by the director. It's a very well-directed film. I should mention the soundtrack was done by Philip Glass, who I've been into for years and years and years. Before he started getting the lucrative soundtrack commissions, he was making huge inroads on certain, they call it minimalism. I'm sure he rejects the term, but Philip Glass, check him out as well. So she wrote for the New Yorker. She knows about Shirley Jackson. Shirley Jackson, here's the kicker, was a witch. She was involved in the occult. Now, Heller, in the review that I mentioned that appeared in the New Yorker, which is the magazine for the literati who are based in New York. That's where J.D. Salinger was brought to prominence through the New Yorker and their editors there. That's a whole talk in itself on how these ideas gain currency and how they trickle down and how this particular class, the intelligentsia, the professionals, And this includes high-level people in the economic sphere, the financial world, that they use these publications to communicate with each other. And little punks like me, the aspirational, say, "Oh, I want to write for that publication." And most Americans are oblivious to it because it's not for them. It's how they communicate ideas to each other. It's their little club, and you don't belong to it. And neither do I. When I say you, I mean me as well. And I'm glad for it. So there's some other tells, like in poker, some giveaways. There's some tells where Zoe Heller comes from. She went to comprehensive school in Camden, or Camden Town, next to Camden Town, with a David Miliband. And here again is this Eastern Jewish European emigre class that we think are Anglo-Saxons, because we think of, right, Hugh Grant or someone like that. But we don't realize that since the 60s, Britain has consciously melted together a new servitor class, I call it. I wrote the book Servitors of Empire, which includes South Asians now, the mayor of London, for example. And they're even probably going to start bringing in some East Asian types. But Eastern European Jews, immigrants, as well as native-born Jews of British stock, were brought to the fore. That's Murdoch. Murdoch was Jewish. His name was not Murdoch. You got to read Kirby Summers to find out who these characters really are. Not just for the sake of unmasking them, but to unmask their motives and what they're up to. So she went to school, private comprehensive school, with a David Miliband. He's a brother, if you don't know British politics, and I'm no expert, but he's the brother of Ed Miliband, who's now a contemporary politician. But I knew Miliband because that's an unusual name. I said, hey, that sounds like this guy. We called him Ralph Miliband, his books. He was a new leftist in the 1960s. We had our new leftists here. The guys that trained Barack Obama, for example, they're all new leftists. David Axelrod, too. He's still around. But Britain had their counterparts to New Left. And one of them, the intellectuals, was Ralph Miliband. In Britain, it should be Rafe Miliband. Ralph is pronounced Rafe. I don't mean to be pedantic, but I just want to relieve the nitpickers of any sort of high-handed comments below. Rafe Miliband. He's a Polish Jewish immigrant. I didn't know that. I thought he was an Anglo-Saxon boy. But the point is that that was her world, right? That's where her family origins lie as well, one generation removed. And it's socialist, it's democratic socialist, it's communist, and it's about the abolition of the family in order to bring through the globalist agenda, which is at bottom communist. It's the universal income. It's what Yuval Noah Harari wants you to submit to. He's only one. There are many. In fact, most of your professors are of that mind. Until they start watching my channel and start reading my work, they're going to keep replicating what they learned in grad school back in the 60s and the 70s and 80s. And it goes through different iterations. It goes through critical race theory. It goes through feminist theory. But it really goes back to these anti-bourgeois, anti-capitalist, communist, globalists, because that's all funded by corporatists, by the way. These are funded by banking families. That's the irony. All these leftists out there who call themselves socialists, you are nothing but the pawns of the people you supposedly want to overthrow. That's the capitalists. When I go to these conferences billed as a socialist conclave of sociologists, anthropologists, political, I was shocked at some of these people whose family names I recognize, who owned breweries, retail stores. They were sort of, Wexler types, except they were in the academic world, but they came from that family wealth. And they came from gangsterism. Again, go to Kirby Summers and read about Wexler. The story didn't end with Epstein. It began with Epstein, so far as I'm concerned. So you see these patterns that rework over and over again that tells you that this is a system that we're dealing with. These are not one-offs. And forget about just getting bogged down on personalities. Think system, not person. I mean, yeah, we look at whoever, Klaus Schwab or Alexander Soros or whoever, sure, yeah. Or Anthony Fauci, Dr. Anthony Fauci, we want to ensure that he gets his justice, right? But that's not the end of it. That's just the tip, as they say. Okay, I'm running out of time, so I got to move on from the New Yorker. Because publishing, and I'm trying to explain to you why publishing matters, even though you don't subscribe to the New Yorker, don't read it regular, or don't subscribe to Vanity Fair. I happened to read those when I was a kid because I wanted to be a professional writer. I wanted to be one of them. But they didn't hang out a sign that said no yellows allowed or, colored drinking fountain. There was no sign there. But you get the message. You're not going to make it. You're not going to go in there. So that's cool. I'm glad. I'm grateful. Heller also wrote, to finish up the theme here, Heller also wrote for Vanity Fair, which I still read regularly, edited by Graydon Carter, who helped to suppress some of the important facts that appeared in the article, the path-breaking article. Journalism matters. Ronan Farrow is a good example. Again, I'll refer you to Kirby Summers' discussion of Ronan Farrow and his relationship with Graydon Carter. He suppressed a lot of the really important parts in that article in Vanity Fair that broke open the whole Me Too movement. So can you understand why these magazines are so important and why it's important that a Canadian runs it? Who's part of the Five Eyes, who's directly linked to the city of his allegiances with his queen, not with America. He doesn't have the Canadian accent. He looks like an Anglo-Saxon person from the United States of America, but they are not your friend. I am your friend, even though I'm a low-down yellow man. And by the way, you notice how Ebonics is being pushed by Kamala Harris? Why do you think for the past few years I've been using Ebonics, which is because I'm kind of like prepping you for what they're going to pull in election 2024 with Kamala Harris. She's one of the sorority sisters of AKA of Howard University, who's part of the control system of the black bourgeoisie, along with Letitia James, the Attorney General of New York, who railroaded Donald Trump. And also Fannie Willis comes out of her. I've told you this before. And I'm going to give my full proper respect and acknowledgement to Brother Steve Coakley. That's where I got it from. And Professor Griff. I know they were the ones who developed these ideas. So you got to check them out. I post some of this on my Patreon, by the way, to the consternation of some. I don't know what they're doing on my Patreon side because, man, this stuff really, really gets their knickers in a twist. So she writes for Vanity Fair. This is all part of strengthening the Anglo-American alliance, the system. The sooner we figure that out, understand it, and recognize it. Gavin McGinnis is supposedly on our side, an independent journalist, but he is Canadian. He's had enough time to become an American citizen. He always talks about the American political system and opines on it. So does, they have the complete freedom. I, as a yellow man, doesn't have any credibility, even though I'm a third, fourth generation American. What's up with that? Okay. And you've got to be attuned to the subtleties and get over the personalities. Russell Brand is not your friend, even though he talks fast and he has this overpowering energy like Svengali that he puts over you. He's a witch. All right. So as I wrap up, who do we look at further? And who have I talked about in past shows here? This is very reminiscent of Shirley Jackson. I'll be talking about more, especially after I read this book. And Patricia Highsmith, who was a lesbian. Remember, she couldn't come out back when she was writing. She wrote Strangers on a Train, Hitchcock, classic film. She also wrote the Tell It Mr. Ripley, right? Starring Matt Damon, the film, which is good. The books, this is all part of the Zoe Heller world that tells me that there's a larger agenda at work, and that's the destruction of the American family, the British family, the middle class, especially. You're going to get used to the basic income. You're not going to have a job, right? And that holds true for the yellow people. Once the yellow people are finished putting in the information railroad, they're going to get rid of them, just like they get rid of the coolies after they built the iron railroad back in the 19th century. I'll give you one other factoid. I read a report published out of Harvard University itself. A bastion of elitism says that the majority of people at the New York Times that have graduate degrees overwhelmingly come out of Columbia. Yes, probably the Columbia School of Journalism. That is worth a talk, and that's worth a book in itself. It'll help explain to you why we live in an empire of lies. Right? All the little complaining and all the little jibes by the retooled comedians, right? Even if they're supposedly on our side, they have a libertarian political sheen to them. They don't understand where this is coming. All they can do is mock it. All it is for them is a potential punchline. Ha, ha, ha. Well, you know what? The joke's on us. And homie, don't play that. I'm your homie. Yes, I am from the ghetto. I'm proud. I lived amongst the blacks and the browns and the yellows in the ghetto under segregation. I'm just telling the newbies because you think I'm making fun of Kamala Harris trying to get real by side slipping into dialect, saying, yeah, they not like us, sister. Yeah, I'm here on the street hustling up votes, baby. That's not gonna it's not gonna play because I'm ghetto. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, it's really good to be in a environment where I can really talk loud and not getting reported by my neighbors. I'm glad to be with you here on this Sunday after the 4th of July. And just remember, the situation of poverty in America can be solved if we look at, and poverty is just one issue. If we look at this systemically and look at the proposed solutions as being really the engines of the problem, that's this democratic socialism or utopian socialism or outright straight up Maoism, which we're seeing, right? The one way to deal with the working class is to get rid of it entirely. That's something that I haven't been hearing about. That is the real goal of techno-communism. Well, the working classes are lazy. They want to watch baseball and Netflix and chill, and we're never going to be able to get to them. They just want their breads and circuits. So let's just do away with the working class. That's new Yuval Noah Harari. Okay. I hope I didn't go too quickly here. I appreciate your comments. Adorno, Matrix, no, and Adorno did not do the Beatles stuff. I still have to deal with flat earthers no matter where you go. King David's lineage lives today. Go for, yeah, very much so. All right. One of these days, I'm going to spend more time on the chat room here. Maybe I'll have a show dedicated just to going back and forth with you on this. But thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I don't want to run too far past my time. I thank you on this Sunday. I will see you next Sunday, God willing. Thank you very much. And please leave any comments below. Like this, subscribe, and please support me on Patreon so I can reinvest the proceeds into. By the way, I did buy, with part of the proceeds of the Patreon, a DVD set of The Conjuring. All right. I'm not going to have that talk ready for next week, but that before I leave, I should mention, I'd kick myself if I left. The Conjuring was based on a real figure in American history. Her name was Bathsheba Sherman. Now, do you think Zoe Heller, who lives in New York, by the way, she's British, but she lives in New York, and she's, she went to grad school at Columbia. I'm sure she's absorbed a lot of Americana. Maybe she picked the hero of her book, Notes on a Scandal, from Bathsheba Sherman, right? Bathsheba Sherman was a real person. She was killed, or she was murdered in 1885 because she was a witch. She was a baby-killing witch, according to her accusers. It's not me saying that. This is what I've read. And that figure was adapted to this film series called The Conjuring. So I said immediately while I was preparing here, so okay, I got to order that. I'm going to order The Conjuring, and you watch it too. We'll compare notes. How's that? That's Bathsheba Sherman. I'm reading here an article about Bathsheba Sherman. It says, some believe she was a witch who worshipped Satan and was related to Mary Easty, a woman who was hanged in the Salem witch trials. Others believe Sherman murdered children in 19th century Connecticut. So you got all these extra-textual, subtextual elements that come together in, I think, Notes on a Scandal. And there's allusions to covens and witches in the film. Bathsheba's husband says, is this a coven or something? You witch? Or he talks to Barbara and says, what kind of spell have you put her under? And you see that Barbara, when she's writing in her obsessive diary, has a figurine of the Madonna, the Virgin Mary, and also praying hands. And also there's a portrait back there. And the director didn't put that in there at random. So it's also subtly an anti-Christian propaganda gesture. But they can't really hammer it out as we're going to reject it. So they have to do it against the grain. And it's up to me to sit down with you and help you tease out these latent meanings so that we can be forewarned and we can outfox these people. We're beginning to do that because of these types of exchanges that ironically began to proliferate on media platforms like TubeU or even X and now Substack and more, because the truth is irrepressible. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I have much more to add to this. Read the book. I encourage you to read it. Get the movie. It's only $7.99 on the retailer that ate the earth. And you will be amply rewarded to see some incredible acting, fine direction, contemporary London, and an excellent soundtrack by Philip Glass. This film, Notes on a Scandal, ticks all the boxes. And sorry, I didn't get to talk about the main difference between the film. I should just say it before I end. In the book, they wind up living together as companionate, implied lesbians, right? Like The Killing of Sister George, or even the D.H. Lawrence novelette, The Fox. That's about two lesbians and a man who threatens to disrupt the lesbianic dyad. That's D.H. Lawrence. They live together in the novel. They come together. But in the film, there's a huge and incredible scene, which you can see for free on TubeU. Some incredible. That's like one of the best scenes in the film. Explosive. And I guess to cater to public sentiment, they talk about her going to Shiva, going to prison for 10 months. Right. I'm sorry we didn't get the chance to finish with the story of Mary Kay Letourneau, but look it up for yourself. I found out in researching today's talk that she died at age 58. She died not too long ago of colon cancer. She's the teacher who married the boy who she started fooling around with when he was 13 years old. This is in the United States of America, Mary Kay Letourneau. And she's the daughter of a famous right-wing, ultra-conservative politician by the name of John Schmitz. He was a member of the John Birch Society, which he thought was too moderate. He's from Orange County. And when I was selling textbooks, I was a salesman at one point, because I couldn't get any commissions from Vanity Fair or the New Yorker or the Nation. I couldn't make it. So I had to sell books as a salesman. And one of my accounts was Santa Ana College. And I was at Santa Ana College one day and visiting the political science department trying to sell them textbooks. And I ran into the nameplate that said John Schmitz. He was an instructor at Santa Ana College. So that was the closest I got to him. Anyway, what's a show without me talking about myself a little bit, even though some of you don't like it? But I've been around so long. I'm kind of like Zelig. I just kind of pop up here and there. Thank you very much for allowing me to extend this show longer than it should have. See you next week, God willing. Bye. Take care.